Hi, so my name's Mr. Hopkinson. I'm Head of History at Harris Greenwich. I'm using this virtual PowerPoint presentation to give you an overview of our intent with the history curriculum and also give you some of the headlines for Key Stage 3, so from Year 7, 8 and 9. So starting with our intent, this is a good place to start because it shows you really what our aims are with the history curriculum. So one of our core aims really is to ensure any one of our students has the knowledge, skills and critical thinking necessary to study history at university, but not only that, but to be equipped with the wisdom to navigate the challenges that modern society presents and also to succeed in their future careers. And that's the case for every single student who we teach, regardless of whether they do history up to Year 9, GCSE or all the way to A-level. So in the next few slides, I'll give you an overview of our Key Stage 3 curriculum and how we intend to give our students the knowledge, skills and that critical thinking through one of our core concepts, protest. So if you go on to the next slide now, you'll see that I start off by talking about Year 7. So with Year 7 then, you can see on the left hand side some of our topics. So they range from a study of the Norman Conquest, Islamic civilizations, and finishing with the Glorious Revolution in the late 17th century, which a period which saw the emergence of Parliament. So in terms of that core concept of protest, so that concept is threaded through, particularly so through a unit called Power and the People, so where students study a really significant event called the Peasants' Revolt in the 1380s in England. And that shows like one of the first examples really within medieval society of the common people sort of protesting against monarchy. And likewise within the Glorious Revolution we see that protest, that element of protest appear again. So that concept is revisited throughout Year 7, but these lessons are also anchored by really strong inquiry questions. For example, we ask students to answer questions such as, what is the significance of the Peasants' Revolt for England? Okay, so what did it mean for English society that hundreds of thousands of peasants had revolted and protested against the monarchy? And swaying away from that core concept, if we look at Islamic civilizations, we also pose questions like, how did Islam contribute to the development of science? So this really highlights as well another aspect of our curriculum, which I didn't talk about in the intent, was the diversity of our curriculum as well. So by not only focusing on England, so British history, we also aim to sort of show students different areas of the world at the same time and how they were similar or different, more advanced, less advanced. So in the next slide on Year 8, you will see protest and other concepts, again, which are revisited and students study to a greater depth. So in Year 8, the concept of protest is revisited and expanded upon so that students, by the end of Year 8, are leaving with a much more complex understanding of what protest means. So we study it through a variety of different time periods, starting with the transatlantic slave trade. So we look at the origins of the slave trade, but also its abolition through the lens of the Haitian Revolution, and also through the abolition movement in Britain. And that segues nicely into the struggle for African American civil rights in the 1950s and 1960s, where again we look at the contribution made by the civil rights movement and its protests. For example, as you can see in the photo on the right, the march, or the Selma March as it's known, which resulted in the Voting Rights Act. We then move on to a Britain at War depth study. So we look at the experience of the home front in Britain in World War I and World War II, also the experiences of soldiers in Britain and also soldiers from Britain's colonies that fought for Britain in both those conflicts. We also finish with a study of women's suffrage, so the struggle for the right to vote for women in the early 1900s, late 19th century, again looking at the power of protest. Again, you can see that we're using quite powerful inquiry questions like what is the significance of the Haitian Revolution, particularly in the struggle for the abolition of slavery. We also ask our students to assess questions like, had life changed for African Americans by the end of the 60s? So had life really improved for African Americans by the end of that decade? So that leaves year 8 then. So students leaving year 8 have a really complex understanding of protest, which prepares them nicely for year 9. So for year 9 in the last year of Key Stage 3, our topics, as you can see, are narrowed down to three very broad studies. But this gives us time really to go to greater depth, which really prepares our students for GCSE. We start off with a study of the British Empire. We look at the migration that happened within the British Empire and the impact on the British people and on the people who were colonised by the British, starting from around sort of 1800s and finishing the present day. With this, and we're thinking about like critical skills, we really get our students to start thinking about the viewpoints of historians and the viewpoints of people who were alive within these time periods. So for example, we study the life of an imperialist called Cecil Rhodes, and you can see his statue being removed in Cape Town in 2015. And we ask questions like, how have opinions of Cecil Rhodes changed over time? But not just how, but also why have opinions of Cecil Rhodes changed over time, from being a person who universities used to make statues for to now why are we taking down these statues? So it's really getting those critical thinking skills working, particularly with studies like this. We also look at, in terms of migration, what's the significance of the arrival of Empire Windrush in the 1940s for Britain? In terms of protest as well, we move into our study of the Holocaust, but we have actually a genocide depth study, and we've enlarged that to include a study of the Rwandan genocide in 1994. But within our study of the Holocaust, we ask questions like, how did the Jews resist Nazi persecution? So again, you can see that theme, or that core concept of protest and resistance being revisited in a really, really complex period of time. And then our final study is the Arab-Israeli conflict. So we look at the complexities of the causes of the conflict. So again, we look at protests both from the Arab and the Israeli sides. And that, again, that really sort of acts as a springboard for students going on to study history at GCSE, where they start year 10 with a study of international relations. So in terms of the headlines of the curriculum, that's what I'm doing in terms of this presentation. But if you go onto the school website, you can find under the curriculum page, you can find the full history curriculum narrative. You can find our one-page curriculum, where our curriculum is specified in great detail, much greater detail than I can specify in this presentation. But I hope you found that useful and interesting. Thank you very much.